Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Som TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. On today's show, we are going to talk about several things. I have Claire Coppi, our Senior Vice President of Furmint Awareness for International Furmint Day. Claire, are you excited to be on the podcast?
I am just so excited to be here and to talk about Furmint with you, Jason.
Furmint, a Hungarian grape that really does not get enough love. These wine days, I'll be honest with you, I can most take it or leave it because we like to celebrate wine all the time, but this is one that needs awareness. After I speak with Claire, I'm going to speak with Anthony Zhang of VinoVest, and we're going to talk about some, the trend of all of these winery acquisitions that are happening, especially in Napa right now. It's kind of insane. Constellation is buying up wineries, then they're selling ones, and a lot of the quote-unquote family wineries that you are used to and see their names on the winery or on the labels are not those family wineries anymore. And so we're going to talk about kind of what that means for wine, and if you're listening and have had your winery acquired, I'll let you know how to invest in Som TV. I also want to tell you guys, Som TV is $49.99 for a year. So if you are listening, don't forget, we have a full video streaming service with hundreds of hours and new content all the time. Sparklers is airing. There's only a couple episodes left. The feedback has been tremendous, and thank you all for listening and loving the show as much as you do. Claire, are you ready to talk about Furmint?
I'm past ready. Let's get going.
Past ready. You had to sit through that. You had to sit through that whole diatribe right there, just waiting.
I just want to talk about Furmint.
I think it's these. Let me start with, what do you think of these wine days? It's February 1st is Furmint Day.
Yes.
International Furmint Day, which does Furmint. What do you think of these days? What do you think of these wine days, Claire?
I mean, they're fun. They're not hurting anybody. And like you said, we love to celebrate wine every day. But, if there are some days where particular regions or grape varieties, or in some cases spirits, get a little extra love, what's wrong with that? And and it does raise awareness for maybe some more obscure, less appreciated grapes that need to be on people's radars more.
Good. Yeah, I agree.
Like
I mean, they do. It does get a little.
It's a lot.
Sometimes it's a little ridiculous where it's like International Merlot Day, and then you're like, National Merlot Day is 4 weeks later. And you're like, what the hell is going on? Or
there's Syrah Day and then Shiraz Day. It's like, okay. There's a lot.
Yeah. Well, like we said, this is a grape that deserves some credit.
For sure.
Sweet stuff aside, this is a grape that I don't think a lot of people can name off the top of their head. Maybe some of the people listening to this podcast in the beverage industry, but
yes,
for the most part, what is your relationship with Furmint?
I remember I first tasted it when I was working at a Mirabelle wine bar, and I was still very, very new into the wine industry. And I tasted, I think a rep brought it in to taste, and I was like, what is Furmint? Like, this is something completely new. And it was a dry style of Furmint from Hungary. You see some dry styles made all over the world now, but Furmint is mostly produced out of Hungary. And it was just so delicious and not unfamiliar at all. It tasted like a lot of nice, dry, crisp white wines that I enjoy drinking. So it was definitely in my wheelhouse. And it was really fun then to introduce it to guests and be like, hey, my mind was blown by this wine. And I bet you're going to love it as well. It's super pairable too in that dry style.
Is it hard to sell wines like this to somebody? I mean, look, all of us know it's almost feeling like countless individual grapes that are delicious and deserve respect and
sure,
people would really love. But still, you have to get people to not only try it, because that's one thing, but also put their wallet on the table and buy it. So is it hard? Is it hard to do that?
I would say it depends on what arena you're trying to sell this wine in. I was mentioning a wine bar where people tend to be a little more adventurous because wine bars have usually longer lists of wines by the glass. And then you have the option of giving them a little taste of it before they commit to a whole glass. So they don't feel like, oh no, I might be committing to something I don't actually like. So it just kind of allays that fear of trying something new. Whereas, when it's just purely on the bottle list, it has to be under a certain price point. It definitely would have to be under $100, I would say, for a guest in a restaurant to feel comfortable trying something that's completely alien to them,
Yeah. Are any of the dry styles over $100? I've never seen anything close to it. I don't think so, though.
No, that's the thing. It's pretty accessible price-wise when you're in that dry style. It's when you start getting into the sweeter styles that it gets quite pricey.
Right. What would you? I mean, I've had quite a bit of this stuff, and it's interesting because it is very crisp. But I'm trying to think. You would be better to answer. What would you compare it to? I hate this question, but you also need it. What would you compare it to that people drink more often? Because it's not like Riesling. Whereas Riesling
it's not
has
like
a
Riesling.
whole... Yeah.
I mean, it could be like a dry Riesling that like has none of the petrol on it. So like maybe some dry Alsatian Rieslings, because it does have very nice lime zest notes, I find. But I would say maybe more of the lines of like a Chenin Blanc or a dry, leaner Chardonnay, I would say. Maybe like one of those. Or, even like an Albarino, there's a little florality to Furmint sometimes as well.
Yeah, I think Albarino is a good call. I mean, again, that's the cool thing about all these different grapes is that you can compare them, but they are not the same. They just are not. I remember, we filmed several things with you the other day. Furmint was one of them, but in each case, these tasting notes, you're kind of trying to say, here's what it's like, and it's just not like... It's just not.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's got this different, it's got a different spirit to it.
For sure.
A little je ne sais quoi that you can't quite put your finger on.
I would imagine that most people's first interaction with this grape would be the sweet varietal.
Perhaps, yeah.
Tokaj. And I feel the exact same way when we talk about Sauternes. I feel the same way when we talk about some of the sherries that have a little bit of residual sugar. I feel like they're completely unsung, completely underrated.
Oh, yeah.
Where do we start with Tokaj?
I would say that Tokaj is even more unsung and unheralded than Sauterne.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really foreign to a lot of people. I mean, it's got such an incredible history, though. So yeah, the sweeter style is called Tokaj Azu, named for the region that this wine is produced out of, Tokaj, in northeastern Hungary. It's usually a blend of a few grapes. One of the primary ones is Furmint. And it's late harvested, usually, now it's getting warmer, but usually like after October. And ideally, it's been affected by botrytis, that lovely noble rot that shrivels and concentrates the sugars in the grapes. And then it just creates this really beautiful, rich... It tastes similar to Sauterne. A lot of people would compare it to that. And it has a range of sweetness levels called putoños that you'll see on the label. It ranges from 3 to 6. And then you start getting into the essentia, which is like the pure nectar, the pure like little bits of runoff juice from harvest. Very expensive, very rare. And this was very special as well. This was kind of the prized wine of the Habsburg dynasty. And a lot of royalty. This was like reserved only for royalty, this particular style. So it was very fancy.
Their palate must have been interesting with all the genetic problems that the Habsburgs had. I know they had like, it was like entire generations that had like no mouth. Like
no chin, their chin
no
just
chins. Became known as like the Habsburg chin. So if you want to taste the wine of the Habsburgs,
the chinless inbred royals.
This is not a good sale for for what is probably one of the world's great wines.
Yeah, it's sweet though. It's sweet.
It's like very sweet.
500 to I think I read the 2000 vintage of the Tokaj Essentia was 900 grams per liter of residual sugar.
900 grams per liter.
They don't even consider it really a wine because it rarely goes above like 5 to 6% alcohol.
I mean, at that point, why don't you just measure anything else in it besides the sugar? You should just be like, it's X amount of grams of other stuff besides sugar, because at that point, it's mostly sugar.
It's just sugar.
It is good, though. It is, I think that the idea of sweetness turns people off so much now, which is, I think sweetness is not what people think it is in a lot of cases.
No.
And the other thing, too, is sweetness has an application. If you do it right, which you were very good at when you worked, on the floor. But if you use it correctly, sweetness is a hell of a tool and delicious.
Absolutely.
And a lot of these Tokajs, they have acid.
Yes, they have quite high amounts of acid. So yes, it comes off sweet, but when you find out how many grams per liter of residual sugar is in that, it's amazing that it wouldn't come off more cloying than it does because of those acid levels. They're just balancing it out beautifully. These wines are gorgeous.
Yeah, they really are stupendous. Is there anywhere else that grows Furmint since we're...
Yeah, you see it in small percentages in Austria. South Africa, I think, has done some bottlings of Furmint. California, you see it a little bit, but it's pretty minimal. It's mostly going to be in the Tokaj region of Hungary.
Is Furmint something I should stock up on right now for the market? Is it going to go up in value?
Unfortunately, I don't know about that. There are wiser people that you should talk to.
Well, good news. I'm talking to Anthony Zhang right after you.
That's the guy to talk to.
Literally, wine investment is his thing. Though I will say he's like fingers on the whole marketplace. So he's a business.
He's brilliant with that.
Yeah, he's a smart guy. He's a smart guy. He has more money than me. It is what it is.
It's because he doesn't drink his wine.
That's right. He saves it. I drink all of it. So when it comes to where should somebody start with, is this the place to start with Hungarian wine, Furmint?
I think so, yeah.
I just want to get this. I want to keep saying this word because it is a unique opportunity to talk about a grape that is often not mentioned by name.
Yeah.
Where should people start with it? Should they try the sweet one? Should they try the dry one? And where the hell should they get it?
I would start with the dry one. I would start with the dry one because that'll be familiar to most people's palates. If you do like a sweeter style of wine, get going into the sweeter ones and start out with the lower putoños, so the lower levels of sugar, like 3. I would start with the dry. It's really, really accessible. Again, it's cheap-ish, it's very approachable price point-wise. So even if it's not your favorite wine on the planet, you're not going to be like, but I just dropped $60 on a half bottle of this sweet wine. But I do highly recommend, if for the more adventurous palates out there, trying the Tokaj, the sweeter style of Furmint, because it is very rewarding once you try it.
It is crazy to think that that's an adventurous thing when, less than 100 years ago, probably 60 years ago, that would have been one of the more, sought after, really expensive, hard to get a hold of bottles. So
it was reserved only for royalty,
And they do age forever. The sweet ones, like before you and I jump off, I should say that these bottles with the acid and the sugar, you can find Tokaj that goes back to the 1700s and completely drinkable still. In fact, you may see a bottle of that in something coming up. Not quite that old, but very, very, very old.
That's cool. Did you get to taste that?
I will get to taste that.
Ooh.
We have not filmed it yet, but I will say this. I'm always on the lookout for bottles that are older than the United States, which sounds like an old time, but the U.S. is brand new.
We still babies.
We're babies. And Tokaj is one of the wines that can oftentimes do that. So,
for sure.
So yeah. Claire, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast. And without further ado, I'm going to speak with my friend Anthony Zhang. Anthony, it's great to have you back on. Anthony Zhang from VinoVest is here to talk about kind of like the business of wine.
Yes.
You and I were talking before we were, started recording about all of these crazy acquisitions that have happened in the wine industry, and there's nobody better to sort of riff on this than you. I'm glad to have you back on the Sound TV podcast. Where do we start with this? Because I think this is a very little known aspect outside of a headline for the normal drinker.
Yeah, 2021 was a crazy year for wine acquisitions. There were 3 deals over $300 million each that happened in 2021, which signals just massive shifts for a lot of these larger wineries that have scale.
So when we talk about a winery getting acquired, we'll get into which ones, but most of these have to do with Napa, we're going to talk about right now. Why don't you talk for a minute about these larger, bigger parent companies and what their assets are and how big they are, and give some examples, because I want to put this in perspective.
Yeah, I think Treasury Wine Estates is a good one to talk about because they're the ones that just bought Frank Family Wines. Frank Family makes some pretty incredible wines, great Chardonnay, great Pinot, great Cabs, and they got acquired for over $300 million last year. Treasury owns a bunch of wineries, right, at different price points, different brands, and they really sought out Frank Family because they were missing a luxury Chardonnay in their portfolio. So think of it as them sort of completing a puzzle piece, right? They want to have a flagship brand or flagship wine at every single spectrum of the price point. So people think of, $15 and under, $15 to $20, $20 and above, right? And you want to have a fighting chance on the retail shelves and in restaurants for every single one of those categories and subcategories. So for a large parent holding company like Treasury, instead of probably spending the next 20 years developing out a brand and growing the wines themselves, they'd rather just acquire it, and from a great and beloved brand like Frank Family.
Rich and Leslie, you can see them on blind tasting sessions on our thing. They're friends. So I should say congrats to them. But also, it kind of gives me pause when these giant brands are bought. Does this dilute the brand? Is it better to be under a parent company? You see in Napa right now, it's getting fewer and fewer that there are these family-owned wineries. It's Mondavi is owned, Beringer is owned. These are names that are family names, but they're really owned by bigger companies. And with Frank Family, which is a family name, obviously, that is now another one goes down. So I just wonder, is that good for the Valley? Is this just a sign of growth? What are your thoughts on this?
There's good and bad, right? I think the good part, obviously, it's a great financial outcome for everybody involved with Frank Family. But I think the other benefits is that you get a lot more shared resources, right? The parent company clearly will know how to market better, clearly will know how to streamline operational sources better. And a lot of the things that you really just need scale to be able to reduce your costs. So I think that from bottom line perspective, Frank Family as a business will be able to run more effectively and more efficiently. And with that extra cash, they're going to take those proceeds and put it into hopefully just creating an even better experience, right? Whether it be on premise, whether it be expanding their footprint in terms of their D2C or online outreach. I think those are kind of a lot of the places where wineries are investing in. And especially if you are family owned and are smaller and maybe just don't have the resources to be able to focus on so many things at once, those are things that you're missing out on or may just be like a pipe dream. So I think in terms of the reach of the brand and the growth of it and the business operations of it, there's going to be a lot of benefits there.
Treasury owns Mondavi, right? Is that correct? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I believe so.
There was an enormous amount of controversy, but I would say friction between the Mondavi family and Treasury Wine Estates, and there still is. I mean, there's it's weird. It's not like I have friends on both sides. It's not like they're at war or something like that. But there's definitely, when your family name goes with something and that's trademarked, that family still exists. And it's an interesting thing that now all of the Mondavis go out and they make wine. And I think it leads to a bit of confusion that the name is owned by, a larger group. When that happens, does that help a name or dilute a name? What happens? Because, you obviously as a wine investment company, you're looking at futures and the long-term value of a wine and this and that. Does this help the value?
It could help or hurt. So for us, the ownership really matters, right? The fact that the Mondavis are no longer actively involved operationally or strategically with the brand is a big thing for us. And same thing when, I think the equivalent in Europe is LVMH, right? They're a publicly traded company. They make a ton of acquisitions. They own Krug. They own most of the champagnes, right? They own Veuve, Dom, Moet, Cheval Blanc, right? So
Ruinart,
Ruinart. So, they are associated with luxury and they're associated with bringing that to a really, I think, high level. And whenever a winery gets acquired by LVMH, we know that that's going to be bringing that brand up in price, in stature, in global perception. And I think there are companies like that we want to watch out for a change of ownership, right? It's kind of like if, for example, tomorrow Microsoft announces a new CEO, right? That's really going to change everybody's sentiment and outlook on the company because that's the new leadership. So I think that's something that from an investment standpoint, we definitely look at for market changing news is that can really drastically change the trajectory of a winery.
So it can actually make it more valuable, you're saying? I mean, it
can.
It is. I mean,
if it's good management, right? We've also seen stories of, maybe a winery getting acquired and then the management company just does not do as good of a job as the previous owners. And then you can see it kind of go to shit, right? Maybe the head winemaker leaves, maybe other key executives that made the winery what it was prior to the acquisition leave, and then they replace it with new management, right? Maybe the people that the parent company and maybe they just don't do as good of a job as the previous people.
Interesting. I mean, I wonder too, whenever I see this type of stuff happen, I wonder if people are creating wineries now, much like the tech industry, just to get acquired. It's kind of a very strange counterintuitive thing when you think of wine being such a long-term goal.
Mm-hmm.
But, Napa's kind of in this weird middle place where it is both, has history, but also is pretty new. And it's almost like a weird kind of slow gold rush, that kind of happens. I mean, $300 million for a winery is a lot of money.
Yeah.
That is a lot of money.
That is a ton of money, especially if you think about the multiples. There were some numbers on the annual sales, I think was around 50 million. So, depending on the growth rate, which I don't know what they did in the years previous to that, but that's 6x your annual sales, which is pretty crazy if you think about, what the business is and the size of it and the potential, payout for everybody. I don't know really how the deal was structured, if it's all of it at once, if some of it's stock versus cash, but all of those things can matter. But to your gold rush comment, there are also examples of of quicker gold rushes, right? Gary Vaynerchuk's company was sold in like a year or two after he announced it. So it can be quicker too, right? If you're just using some of the picks and shovels that already exist, right? He didn't plant the vines himself. He's already just sourcing from an existing winery, taking existing supply chain and just pretty much slapping a great marketing brand on top of it. You can get an acquisition pretty quickly.
Yeah. I guess it does show something that I think you've been screaming on top of a mountain for years, is that wine is not going down in value. It's just not. It's continuing to climb. And as you know from talking to me on the podcast, I definitely have mixed feelings about that because I do want people to be able to enjoy it. But I also know that that's not how products associated with luxury go. So this window where I say this like an old man here, but like I remember when Caymus Special Select was like a wine you could get. It was not that expensive. I mean, this was only 14, 15 years ago. Now that wine is outrageously expensive. I mean, like to the point where I question whether it's worth it or not as wine. Now, as an investment, it's probably definitely worth it. But I just think that it's a very interesting thing. So getting back into the acquisition thing, who else has been acquired and sold? And we were talking about Coppola.
Yeah, so Francis Ford Coppola and another brand, they sold to Delicato Family Wines, and that deal was estimated to be $500 million. And even bigger than that, Constellation Brands sold a portfolio of 30 wineries for about $800 million to Gallo. So that's an interesting one because it's two big corporations just kind of selling to each other. And that's something that we've kind of seen strategically is like, all right, that means that Constellation wants to move to the higher end, right? If they're offloading a lot of their low price brands and wanting to focus on that sort of mid-tier or luxury segment, which kind of goes back to your comment that wine is just getting more and more expensive and people are willing to pay more for wine that is more expensive as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Coppola brand, the Coppola brand is not, I don't mean this in a negative or anything, but I don't think it's associated with really high luxury. You can find Coppola wines, which are very solid, but you can find them at grocery stores and things like that. It's not,
like, $12, $15 for some of them. And some of the higher ones I think can go up to 30, perhaps. I think I've seen a few there, maybe reserve selections like that. So they've got a lot of wines everywhere at different price points that are, I think, accessible to most people.
Yeah, he's I want to take 1 minute and talk about Francis Coppola. Just 1 minute. This is a guy who it doesn't need me to say he's like one of the greatest pop artists that's ever existed. I mean, truly, The Godfather, Godfather 2, Apocalypse Now. I mean, these are, when you say the word masterpiece, that is just absolutely it's misused so often that word doesn't have meaning. But these are the true meaning of like how great they are. But he's also a guy who takes probably the biggest swings in business and in creative that exist. And so it's very strange that when this got sold, he's been trying to make this film called Megalopolis for like 20 years. Hugely ambitious, crazy expensive. And all of a sudden, this deal went through where he sold his winery, which is like the only thing, this property he had when Apocalypse Now went completely tits up and everybody thought it was going to fail in the, 79. He went and like held refuge at this place. So the fact that he sold this coveted spot in Napa that he loves and adores was amazing. All of a sudden, he said he's going to pay for Megalopolis himself if he has to.
There you go.
So this is a guy who's been, out of money many times because of movies. And I find it interesting that he just can't stop drinking at the trough of like big swing creatively. I bet you we're going to see this crazy movie coming from him. And I bet you that the proceeds from this sale are going to have something to do with it because it was immediately one press got traded for the other. And so it's like my two worlds colliding, where I just love film and also, I love wine. It's really, really interesting. And then the question is, did they take the Coppola name for all of wine? Because, I mean, the Coppola name is almost now to maybe a younger generation or a different sect of people, maybe more known for wine than it is for film, off the top of one's head.
It certainly is for me. I love that story, actually. I didn't really know the details into the backstory of history, but that's just an example of just betting on yourself, right? That's, to me, like major, major respect in doing that, right? He's playing the long game and boom, this massive, multi-$100 million acquisition comes through and he's got life-changing money to be able to do more life-changing projects.
Well, he's a guy that is, I don't think anybody has taken swings like him. He's been bankrupt many times. He's made films that have almost ruined studios multiple times. I mean, massive. And he's also escaped from the jaws of death. If anybody knows the story of Apocalypse Now, there's a documentary called Hearts of Darkness that his wife, Eleanor, directed. And it, I think, is one of the best documentaries ever made, let alone one about film. And the reason I bring this up on this podcast is you can see them at their Napa estate while he's literally losing his mind. They have $20 million of their own money invested into Apocalypse Now, and it's a surefire flop. Though it didn't flop, it's one of the rare occasions where it actually worked. It's a great look into the mind of somebody that does exactly what you just said, betting on yourself, even to a point of like insanity. I mean, like to where you're about to go crazy. And it's funny to link, careful business with that kind of reckless and incredibly brave creativity, which exists in business. But, it's hard to see it on such a large scale. So Coppola is now off the market, Coppola Wines. Who else? We talked about Frank Family. What were the other big acquisitions?
And then I think the Constellation deal, right? That one was huge.
Oh, right.
Not all of the brands were named in that deal, but there were over 30 of them. So
Constellation offloaded. Constellation offloaded 30 brands to Gallo. What do you think that deal looks like? I mean, Gallo, so Gina Gallo, who we know well, and she's again with her husband, John Charles Boisset, on a blind tasting sessions recently on Som TV. It's fascinating to be around these people because I wonder, do they all have dinner together? Do they know each other's kids? Do the kids know each other? Are they adversaries? Because these are two huge. I mean, I guess multinational companies,
Yeah, the two biggest giants in America for sure. Them and LVMH and maybe Treasury, right? That's very rarefied air to be in. And the fact that Gallo is started by a family and still, the family is still in those management decisions, that I think is also very unique because at least to what I know, it feels a lot less corporate.
Yeah, I think it probably is. But then again, you never know. I mean, it's like you watch an NFL game, but you don't realize behind that NFL game, it's one of the most corporate organizations that exists. I mean, the NFL is extremely corporate, so you never know. All right, I want to try something here. Now that Frank Family sold for $300 million, it kind of sets a bar of like what a winery is worth for good and bad. I'm going to give you $900 million, Anthony, and you get to spend it right now in, let's call it Napa and Sonoma. Taking Frank Family Vineyards and saying that's worth $300 million. What would you buy up there with $900 million if you're trying to be profitable in 10 years? I'm just curious where you would go. What would you buy?
I think I would go for a brand that really needs restoration, right? Like really needs that like TLC, because that's where you get the most upside, right? Frank Family, I think, is thriving, right? They're in most of the best restaurants, best steakhouses, best sort of seafood places in most of the restaurants I've been in America. They're beloved. They're in a lot of the higher end grocery stores.
Yeah, and they're not cheap either. They do have some wine that you can get for 30 some bucks, I think.
Yeah, but they can get up there, right? Like I think not to the hundreds of dollars, but I would pick something that sells wine in that range. I think that's a great range to be in because it's enough for someone to just be able to buy on a weekly grocery trip. It's not a total splurge, but it still has room to creep up, right? And I think consumer trends are showing us that people are becoming increasingly open to trying things above that $20, $25 range, which used to kind of be that consumer threshold of being like, oh, that's too expensive for me if I don't know anything about wine, which most people feel about today. But then I think the real upside is helping to tell the story in the marketing, right? So I would go for really a Napa estate that has that history, right? Frank Family's been around for a long time. And if you look at other ones like Heights and Mayacamas, they've both been around for a very, very long time. They're, I think, both under incredible management right now and really growing their portfolios. But it would have to be something like that. I'd want to do my digging, but these would be, these be acquisitions probably in, I'd say $100 to $200 million range. They'd be smaller acquisitions than the Frank Family, but the upside is there because you have all the history, you have the story. You just need someone to tell it. You just need a business operator to come in and actually make it efficient and make it profitable. And I think that's really the key, right? Wine You know that adage where it's like, if you want to become a millionaire, start as a billionaire and start a vineyard, right? Or start a winery. And it's a lot of those maybe passion projects that are on incredible terroir and land, maybe started by a bunch of billionaires in the 70s and 80s. So they've got that land there, they've got that estate, they've got that view. And from there, you just have a really great foundation to work with in terms of turning it around. And that's why I think private equity firms are just chomping at the bit. They've got a ton of dry powder to load up on and to make these acquisitions. So I think we'll see a lot more in 2022 that are going to be huge $100 million, multi-$100 million splashy headlines.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if anybody wants a streaming service, you let me know. We got one.
There you go.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Anthony, it's great to talk to you. I mean, I definitely have some wine brands up there that I could name that I would buy right now if I had the money. But
what would it be? Tell me.
I mean,
what would you buy right now?
You're talking history and you're talking the actual quality of a product, and they would have to have enough product. There's a winery that you can see on our Behind the Glass called Smith Madrone, and they're famous for making some of the best Riesling probably outside of Europe. But they also do cab. I've had their cabs back to their first or second vintage. They do an amazing Chardonnay, and they're up on Spring Mountain in a really incredible spot. They would be the first one I would be like, knock, knock. I can't believe nobody has just pulled up with a dump truck full of money at Chateau Montelena, though maybe they have.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I've heard rumors of deals falling through and things like that on Montelena. Those are the kind of wineries like Montelena. That's got to be one of the crown jewels of Napa that is not currently owned.
And they've changed a lot of ownership throughout the years, right? They've definitely evolved and changed. And I'm not really sure what their direction is now, but they're kind of stuck between this like old Napa sort of like you need to be in the know or knowledgeable about wine or appreciate history to get there.
Yeah.
But they haven't really broken into, I think, like the level of like recognizability of a Frank family, for example.
I think they haven't had to do the same kind of marketing that most wineries have had to do. I mean, they're part of the Judgment of Paris, and a lot of their top cabs, I know that a lot of it's allocated because they have a giant wine list who just gets their flagship Montelena estate shipped to them. I'm just trying to think, like, there's so many wineries up in the Napa Sonoma. I mean, Hanzel, I don't know if you know Hanzel, but they are like one of the truly great Pinot producers in the world, a wonderful location. They're actually technically in Sonoma.
Oh, really? I got to check them out then.
Oh, Hanzel's great. They're pioneers. In the 50s, what they did with Pinot Noir. Their wines are not cheap, by the way. The harvest scenes at the beginning of Psalm 1 were all filmed at Hanzel.
Okay, cool.
They make one of the best Chardonnays I've had in California. Anyways, we could go on and on and on about this stuff, but I do think there's going to just be more and more breaking news. There's conversations happening as we speak right now. But I haven't seen, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, that brand, I haven't seen them purchasing a lot of stuff here stateside. But I bet you that there's a possibility that it will, because clearly it's been proven to have value.
That's true. And they're seeing all these acquisitions happen. And I can guarantee you their M&A department's like, hey, like, how can we get a piece of this action, right? Because they obviously have the stranglehold over all of Europe and, starting to get into South America as well. But they need to tap into North America as well. Yeah.
Well, good luck with the taxes in California. Have fun with that.
There you go.
All right, Anthony, it's great to have you on. I can't wait to talk about whatever the next thing in the business of the business is with you, bud.
All right. Always a pleasure, Jason.
All right. Talk soon. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Enjoy Furmint Day. And don't forget, Anthony Zhang has a series on SOM TV called Wine Today. It is about all of the sort of business news and things that are happening in the wine business. It's very, very, very fascinating. I learn something every time I watch it. Go to somtv.com, $49.99 for an entire year. And last thing, sparklers, we are coming to the season finale. So make sure you catch up. We're trying to keep spoilers off social media, but it's going to be hard after this last episode. All right, everybody, please be safe. We will talk very soon.